Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, that's his profession. And my daughter doesn't like to cook.
So we, in Israel, just celebrating Yom Yerushalayim. It's been 50 years since they united the different parts of Jerusalem. You can see the footage of the soldier taking the city and the chief rabbi of the army, Rabbi, blowing the shofar. It's beautiful. So I'll start with a story about the War of Independence in 1948. The Haganah were trying very hard to get some weapons to be able to defend themselves when they would get the country. And everyone, no matter where you lived, you helped with the Haganah. You tried to help. There was a farmer who had a potato farm, but he would help move weapons across to where they were needed to defend the different Jewish settlements. Well, the British were not so in favor of him moving these weapons because they called it arms smuggling. And one day they take him and they put him in jail. And his wife sends him a telegram when he's in prison saying, "Honey, I know you like to be a hero and everything, but what about the family back on the farm? Are we meant to plow the field to be able to plant the potatoes? How could you expect me to do that?" He responds to his wife with a telegram saying, "Honey, do not go anywhere near that potato field. That's where we have all of the guns buried." Well, the British police intercept the telegram and they send a delegation, a team, to go find those arms that are buried in the potato field. And search as they may, they can't find any guns.
They plowed his field.
He sends a telegram to his wife the next day, "Honey, you can plant some potatoes now." Jewish ingenuity. So this coming week, we're going to celebrate a holiday. It's a holiday that's not that well known. Passover, everyone knows about. Manischewitz. Matzah, filter fish, it's a well-known holiday. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, everybody knows about. Even the holiday of Sukkot, where Jews sit in booths and huts outside their home, that's better known than the holiday of Shavuot, which we're going to celebrate this Tuesday night, Wednesday, and then Thursday. And what is it that Shavuot is commemorating? So it commemorates the day that the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and we received the Torah. We got the Torah on this day. What's interesting is that every holiday in the Jewish calendar has a specific calendar date. We know that Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month. You would expect it to be the first month if it's the new year, but we actually count Nisan, which is when we left Egypt, as the first month. So Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month. Yom Kippur is on the 10th day of the 7th month. Sukkot is on the 15th day of the 7th month. Passover is the 15th day of the first month, and so on and so forth. Every holiday has a date. The Torah does not give a date for Shavuot. It says, here's what you do. You count 49 days. You count 7 weeks, called the counting of the Omer. And then on the 50th day, you celebrate Shavuot, the day that you got the Torah. And it doesn't have a date. And what's interesting is that in the lunar calendar, we have, in America we go with the solar calendar, which has 365 days. But the lunar calendar is comprised of 12 months. Half of those months have 30 days, half of those months have only 29 days. If you do the math, you'll end up with 354 days in the lunar calendar, and Jews go with the lunar calendar. So you have some months that have 29, some have 30, and the way they used to establish how long a month was that witnesses would come and they say, we see the new moon, the moon waxes and wanes. Right? At the beginning of the month, it's very small, it's almost non-existent, it gets larger and larger. 15th of the month, you have a full moon, and then it again begins to diminish. So witnesses would come and they would say to the court, "We saw the new moon." And the court would establish, okay, this is either a 30-day or a 29-day month based on when the witnesses come. So you could have Shavuot falling out on different days, depending on if the month before it was a 39 or a 30 or a 29-day month. It doesn't always fall on the same day. It's not a guarantee. But it will always be 50 days after Passover, because that is how the Torah prescribes it. So why does this holiday not have a date? Fair question, right? Every holiday has a date. Shavuot has no date. 50 days after Passover. And perhaps the answer is that what the Torah is trying to teach us was that the exodus from Egypt wasn't an end game. That wasn't the end goal. Had we left Egypt and just went off and became some nation like any other nation in the world, it would have missed the point. The point in us leaving Egypt was to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. And therefore, the date of Shavuot is hinged upon Passover because it's trying to link, it's trying to build a bridge between those two holidays. The purpose of us leaving Egypt was to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's an important day in the calendar. You know, if you were to say to me, what's the most important Jewish holiday? What is it that makes Jews Jews? Right? Let's ask the question that way. I believe it's the book that we have, the Torah. The Torah that we have is perhaps the most important aspect of being Jewish. We got it on this holiday, and that's what we're celebrating. So there's an incredible thing that the Midrash tells us. When God was ready to give the Torah to the Jewish people, He didn't come first to us. He didn't come first to the Jews. He went around to the other nations of the world and said, I have a Torah, would you like it? Would you like it? And they said, well, let's hear more about it. What does it say in the Torah? And each nation, God gave them a point. For one nation, well, let's read this through. This is source 1 on our sheet. We're going to do it in English. Page 1, source 1. When the Holy One, blessed is He, revealed Himself to give the Torah to the nation of Israel, He didn't only reveal Himself to Israel, but rather He revealed Himself to all the nations of the world. And first He went to the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, and they're known to be a violent, warmongering people. And He says to them, do you want my Torah? And they say, well, what's written in the Torah? And God responded, it is written, you shall not murder, don't kill. And they said, whoa, you know, that's a toughie for us. Don't murder? That's what we do all the time. And they said, that's the heritage of our nation. They said the very essence of their nation is handed down from their forebear Esau is murder, as it is written, and the hands are the hands of Esau, and you shall live by your sword. And then He went to the children of Ammon and Moab, and He said, would you like my Torah? And they said, well, what's written? And He says, well, the Torah says you can't commit adultery. And they said, no, adultery? We can't do that. Because they say that the foundation of their people is sexual promiscuity. Now, mind you, the nations of Ammon and Moab, how did those two nations form? So there was a man named Lot. Lot was the nephew of Abraham. And Lot was living in a city known as Sodom and Gomorrah. He lived in those cities. And one day God says, I'm going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're wicked people. The foundation, the basis of those cities was social Darwinism, where you had to survive on your own. It was against the law to give charity to somebody else, because if they can't make it, they shouldn't live. You couldn't ever bring guests into your home. And God didn't like these cities. They were the opposite of everything that Jews stand for. And God sent some angels to go rescue Lot, who was a nephew of Abraham, to rescue him from those cities. And Lot is rescued with his daughters. And they find themselves in a cave, and they're looking at the pillars of smoke arising from the cities upon which they once lived. And Lot's daughters didn't realize that it was just their cities that were destroyed. They thought the whole world had been destroyed. And they say, well, how is humanity going to have continuity? How will there be more children in the world? The only people alive are us and our father. And they gave their father intoxicating beverages that night, and they slept with him, which is incest. So and Moab means from my father. She named her son based on this incestuous relationship. So these two nations said, that's the foundation of our people. We can't, no adultery, we can't live by that. And he went to the descendants of Ishmael. And those are many of the inhabitants of the modern day Middle East. And they said, well, what does it say in the Torah? And God says, well, it says you cannot steal. And they said, no stealing? We can't do that. And then finally Hashem came to the Jewish people. And we joyously, readily accepted it. We said we want it. And the way that we said we want it was very significant. And I'm going to read that with you, that's source 2. Let's turn over to page 2. Bless you.
Thank you.
By the way, do you know the reason why we say bless you when someone sneezes? Where did that Gesundheit, right? Zu gesund, right? All of these words. In Hebrew, it's labriut. Where does that come from? So I've heard this, and I believe that it is well-founded. It used to be, in ancient times, before our forefather Jacob, people would live a long life, and they didn't get sick. There was no indication before their end would come. And their life would end very suddenly, abruptly, with a sneeze. And that would be the end. And Jacob saw this, and he said to God, he prayed to God, he said, people need time. They need time to get themselves ready, to prepare their families, to have no inkling. Some people dream about just passing away peacefully in the middle of the night, just not waking up in the morning. And I understand why that is a notion that some people want. But you don't have time to say goodbye. You don't know it's coming. So my wish is, a prolonged illness is a terrible thing, but to have a few days where you have this sense that the end is near. And Jacob prayed to God that's the way humanity should now continue. And he was the first person recorded as lying in his deathbed where he instructs his family. I learn with a group of guys on Tuesday nights. By the way, we have a program with partners called Tuesday Night Partners Learning. It's one-on-one study. You study anything you want with a partner. Rabbi Avi Cohn is our matchmaker. And I tell people all the time, if he was doing marriages, the divorce rate would drop significantly because the people that he pairs up, they learn for years and years. So I was learning with my group last night, and we were studying the concept of ethical wills. We were going through some Jewish wills where basically a parent will write down on paper what they value most, what morals and ethics they see as most important. They want to pass that on to the next generation. And it's an interesting thing because we don't often think in those terms. Like, what's really important to us? Like, how often do we stop and think about that? But when you're forced to put it down on paper because you're going to leave that as a legacy for your children or your grandchildren, it causes you to reflect in a very real way what's really important. So we were just speaking about how a person, if they have some inclination that they're going to pass, they may write one of these ethical wills and leave it for their children, for their progeny. Okay, so we got sidetracked because someone sneezed. So we say la briut or gesundheit or bless you because that used to be a person's end. So we want to wish the person you should be healthy and well and live till 120. All right, that's the basis for that. All right, so we're going to go back now to our regularly scheduled program, and that is when the Jewish people agreed to receive the Torah. They said two words. They said two words that showed their acquiescence, their readiness that we wanted. And what did they say? Let's take a look at the top of page 2. It says that he, that's referring to Moshe, took the book of the covenant and he read it within the earshot of the people. And they said that everything that Hashem has spoken, we will do. In Hebrew, that's na'aseh. We will do v'nishma, and we will hear. We will do and we will hear. That's how they showed how much they wanted the Torah. And here the Talmud finds something very significant, not only in the words that they use, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, but in the order. We will do and we will hear. You always wish that your children will just, when you ask them to do something, I'm a single parent now for the past few days because my wife is on a partner's trip to New York. So I am holding the fort. I'm cooking dinners. I'm doing the carpools. When my wife comes back, I always give her a really big thank you because sometimes you don't appreciate something while you have it, and they go, "Whoa!" You get inundated and overwhelmed, and you try to figure out how to match up the socks of the children. It's not an easy task.
These days they don't have to match.
Excellent. There you go. Makes it simpler.
My granddaughter is we're matching socks.
Yeah. So sometimes you now I'm a single dad. If you say please clean up your room, well, why? What do you mean why? What would you just do? We will do means we are ready to do it, and then we'll ask why, and then we'll come to an understanding. So let's read the snippet from the Talmud. That's the next source 3. On page 2, and it says that Rabbi Simoi expounded the following. At the time that Israel preceded, they first said, we will do, and then they said, we will hear. 60 myriad is 10,000, 10,000s of ministering angels came to each and every individual, and they tied 2 crowns on each Jew, one corresponding to the word we will do, and one crown corresponding to the word we will hear. But when Israel sinned with the sin of the golden calf, right after the Jews get the Torah, They build an idol, a golden calf that they worship. It was not one of the high points in our history. At that point, 110,000 destructive angels, they descended and they removed the crowns. So first I'll just question that hit me right when I studied this piece of the Talmud. If you look at the number of angels that came to reward them, 2 crowns per person, 1 crown corresponding to the Hebrew word na'aseh, we will do. Their readiness to perform the mitzvahs of the Torah. 1 crown corresponding to the word nishma, we will hear. 10,000 angels, right? When it comes time to remove them, it's double the number, 120. It's the same amount of crowns. Why do we need double the number of angels? Fair question? Excellent. So I saw an answer that says that the attribute of kindness, God has different ways that he sometimes relates to the world, sometimes with the attribute of kindness and mercy and compassion. And there are times where he plays a stricter role with justice and punishment, harshness. The attribute of mercy and kindness is stronger. And we see that from the 10 Commandments. In the 10 Commandments, when it speaks about the good deeds that we do, those merits will go for generations to come. They will benefit generations to come. And it says, for thousands of generations, that reward will be visited upon your progeny. Thousands. The minimum of thousands is 2, because once it's plural, it's at least 2,000. When it speaks about how if children continue in the evil ways of their parents, doing sinful things, paganism, things like that, so then they're held accountable for their parents, and that says for up to 4 generations. So if you do the math, 4 to 2,000 is a ratio of 1 to 500, is 500 times greater. Yes, sir?
Say, we will do, and then we'll hear, we'll do what?
Excellent. We will do means we will perform the commandments of the Torah. That's what it means, we will do. Whatever it says in that book, the book of the Torah, we will do.
Wouldn't we have heard those before we do?
So that the readiness that we had was, we had a trust in God that whatever you're going to ask of us is probably beneficial, is probably doable. We wouldn't be asked something that we can't do. And therefore we said, we'll do it. Okay, now tell me what I got to do. But it was that readiness, that's why it was important that we said that first. And we'll explore those ideas a little bit more. All right? I want to go through with you, there are 3, just to tell you what the order of the day, the rest of the class. I want to explore a few approaches and what it really means we will do and we will hear. What does that mean fully? The significance of placing we will do first. And then I want to talk about some of my favorite foods, like cheesecake, or cheese blintzes, or a pasta with cream, and why we have a tradition to eat dairy food on the holiday of Shavuos. All right, so those are the 2 points that we're going to cover over the next little while. So there are a few explanations what it means we will do and we will hear. And the first is put forth by a man known as the Beis Halevi. He's called after the famous book that he wrote, and that is Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, who lived in the 1800s. What are the 2 components we will do and we will hear? And he says there are 2 parts to study of Torah. There are 2 parts that you need to know when you study Torah. Number 1 is, if you want to know how to practice Judaism in a practical way, well, you got to know what the laws are. If a person wants to separate milk and meat in their home, so what are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? And it's not that simple. I'll show you one complexity of it all. So you have 2 sets of pots because you're doing milk and meat separate. Okay, and you have a meat pot, and you're doing dinner for your kids, and you're making spaghetti and meatballs. And you cook spaghetti in the meat pot, not with the meatballs are in a separate pot. And you have some leftover spaghetti, you place it in the refrigerator. The next day, a child says, I want to take some of that spaghetti, and I want to melt cheese over it. Are you allowed, meaning the spaghetti is known as parv, which means it's neither meat nor is it dairy, but it was cooked in a meat pot. Are you allowed to melt cheese over that spaghetti? And you know what the answer is? It depends. All right? Was that meat pot used to cook meat within the last 24 hours? And, the significance of those 24 hours we can discuss at a different time. But if you did not use that meat pot for meat in the last 24 hours, and you're not intentionally cooking spaghetti in the pot to eat with cheese, it's just that you had it left over from the night before, then you are allowed now to take the spaghetti and melt cheese over it. I tried this in my mother-in-law's kitchen, and I have rabbinic ordination, I know these laws well, and she said to me, Chaim, you're trafing up my kitchen. But it's allowed. It's allowed. So if you want to know how to perform the mitzvahs, right? How do you make matzah? There are a whole sets of laws that go in. We just buy the Manischewitz box and we enjoy it. But there are a lot of very strict, detailed laws that go into the process of making the matzah. How many minutes are allowed to elapse from the time you introduce the flour to the water? 18 is right. So you can't have, so someone says 17. 17 is kind of right because you can't have a full 18. So it's got to be, 17.59. Once you hit 18, too long has elapsed, and the fermentation process that will create the dough to rise has begun. There are many intricate laws. So you need to study in order to know what to do. And he says that's the idea of na'aseh, we will do, means we're going to study. He says they both refer to study, but the first kind is we're going to study in order to know what to do. If you want to do the law right, you got to know it. There's another component to the study of Torah as well, which is that the study of Torah is the book of the wisdom of God. And God describes it that He loves studying Torah. And it's considered enjoyable, it's considered meaningful. It's actually a mitzvah to study Torah, not just because you need to know what to do, but the endeavor of Torah study is a very significant mitzvah. One of the greatest mitzvahs is just to study Torah. Even if those laws are no longer relevant. For example, there are laws that applied when we had a temple in Jerusalem. We have Jerusalem, but we don't have a temple anymore. It's still a mitzvah to study those laws, even if you can't perform them. Or let's say you already know the law. Let's say you already know it. It's still a mitzvah to study Torah. There's a story, a great story told about a sage, a very pious man named Rabbi Akiva Eger. He lived in the 1800s, 1700s. I'm going to silence my phone, I apologize. It's not my mother. If it was my mother, I would take the call.
Of course.
So I one time had that dilemma. I was teaching a class, and my phone is near the podium, and it's buzzing. I remember then to close the ringer, but the vibrations get picked up by the mic, and it says "mommy." And I have a policy, which is that whenever my mother calls me, if I see it's her, I don't usually pull out my phone if I'm talking to somebody, and I feel a buzz in my pocket, I don't pull out my phone. I consider it rude. But if I see it's my mother, I always answer. And I'll tell her, can I call you back? There's 40 people I was teaching the class to, and it's my mother calling, and for just a moment, I'm torn what to do. It's my mother. So I say, excuse me, it's my mother calling, and I take the phone call. And I say, Mommy, I'm teaching a class now, is everything good? Yeah, all right, I love you, I'll call you back later. I got a standing ovation. I wasn't trying to in any way, be a performer, but it was women who are about 60 years old, themselves are mothers, and they wish their son would also pick up the phone whenever they called. So the crowd did not mind that I answered the phone. So there's a story told about a man named Rabbi Akiva Eger, and a great rabbi, a sage, a scholar, erudite. And he was traveling across the country, incognito. He didn't want people to recognize him. It was before the paparazzi. It wasn't because he was afraid about, the camera people trying to shoot pictures of him. But he just wanted to be anonymous. Sometimes it's more comfortable when people don't know your identity. And he went to an inn, and he asked the innkeeper, do you have any Jewish books, any Torah books that I could borrow for my night stay in the inn? And the innkeeper gave him one of the more obscure commentaries on the Talmud, one book, which is a commentary on the Talmud. And Rabbi Akiva Eger was studying this commentary. And there was a page that had been ripped out. There was a page missing. And from memory, he filled in the missing page, which means he knew it by heart, which is incredible. This was not even that. To know the Talmud by heart is a significant accomplishment. When I was in school, we would try to memorize pages of it at a time, and recite it from memory, and it's challenging to do that. I remember my father would reward me with $2 for every side of a page that I got by heart. And when you're 12 years old or 10 years old, $2 is that's money. Bless you. So he knew it by heart. And when you first hear that story, you're just struck like, wow, do I even believe it? Okay, if I believe this story, wow, what a scholar, he knew this by heart, incredible. But I think that when you contemplate and you ponder the story a bit more, what really stands out as incredible was he knew it that well, and yet he was still studying it. Sometimes I know that already, but he relished it, he enjoyed it. So there are certain movies that you could just watch multiple times. I can't. There are probably just 3 or 4 movies that I've seen twice. I can't watch a movie. I'm going to Poland soon, so I've seen Schindler's List before. I saw when I was too young. I was very young. My parents probably would not have let me see it. They were out for the day, and I saw a VHS lying around the house, and it said Schindler's List. And I popped it in and I watched it. I was probably about 12 years old when I watched it. Too young. But I need to watch it again because it's been 24 years since I've seen it. But I have a hard time watching a movie twice because I have a good memory. And therefore I remember it already. It's not that enjoyable. So to be able to read the book again and again, he relished the study of Torah, something which he enjoyed. And that's the other element, says the Beis Halevi. You have to study in order to know the correct thing to do. You can't eat kosher if you don't know what makes food kosher. But there's another element of study where you study just for the sake of studying Torah, because you enjoy it. If you know it already, you study it. If those laws are no longer relevant, you can still study it. He says those are the two components. One is we will do to learn to know what to do, and the other one is we will listen, we will hear the words of Torah, and just bask in the enjoyment of it. That's one approach. Let's move on to another. Let's turn to page 3. And this approach comes from a man who was a great Kabbalist, known as the Maharal of Prague. His synagogue where he prayed, called the Altano Shul, is still present in Prague. It's still there. Excellent, excellent. And he says that the Hebrew word to listen, to hear, Shema, has multiple shades of meaning, and he offers 3. In its simplest sense, if you have a speaker who's talking and they're not talking loud enough, you'll say, I can't hear you. By the way, am I talking? Is everyone able to hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, do I hear you means, is the sound audible? Is the decibel level high enough that it's reaching my ears? And he shows a verse in the Torah where it's used that way, and it's used very early on. When Adam and Eve, when Adam and Chava, they sinned, and they ate the forbidden fruit. And it says that they heard the sound of God passing through the garden. That means they heard something. There was a sound. I'll read that verse. We're turning now to page 4. And it's from the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 8. Vayishma'u et kol Hashem Elokim et halech bagan. They heard. Vayishma'u is the plural for they heard. And that means that the sound was audible. But there's another way to use the word to hear. And it's like this in English too. Imagine you're talking to somebody else. And you say, I hear what you're saying, which means I accept what you're saying. And this is used when there was a debate. One of the first debates between husband and wife mentioned in the Torah was a debate between Abraham and Sarah. They had a child named Ishmael. And Sarah felt that Ishmael, his presence in the home was having a very negative influence on Isaac. And she says to Abraham, we need to send Ishmael and his mother Hagar to live elsewhere. They shouldn't be staying in our home. And Abraham, whose primary character trait was kindness, found it very difficult to send them off. And at that point, God intervenes. And he says to Abraham, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah, everything that your wife Sarah is telling to you, Shema b'kola, listen to her voice. Now here, listen. Hear her voice doesn't mean you should hear the sound that she's saying. You should accept it. My wife always reminds me about this verse. That God came in the first marital dispute and he said to the man, you got to listen to your wife. Shema b'kola, listen to her voice. Accept what she's saying. So the word means to accept. But there's a third usage of the word. And that can mean to understand. And it's used in the biblical story of Joseph and his brothers. Remember the story of Joseph. He was sold by his brothers as a slave to Egypt, and through an incredible turn of events, he became the viceroy, second in command of the most powerful country in the world. And one day his brothers come down to get some grain because there was a famine in the world, and they're standing before him. And he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And it says that they had an interpreter as a go-between. They were speaking probably the language of the Hebrews, Hebrew. He was speaking Egyptian. He understood Hebrew quite fine, quite well. But he had to maintain his image. If he spoke Hebrew, well, how does he speak our language? And then they'll start to get suspicious as to his true identity. And there was an interpreter, and it says that the interpreter left the room, and they started speaking freely. You know, sometimes parents will do that. If you speak Yiddish, You could talk to your spouse in Yiddish in front of the kids. You know, for me, my wife doesn't speak Yiddish, so it would need to be Hebrew. But the problem is that 3 out of my 4 children were born in Israel, and my daughter, who's 12, has quite a fine Hebrew because she went through the educational system until she was in 4th grade. So she will just come, sometimes just, you know, there's this word chutzpah, right? She will interject into the conversation in Hebrew. You know, like, I know what you're talking about, and here's what I think about it. Like, yes, we should watch that movie tonight. You know, like, sometimes like you don't want the kids to know that you're suggesting showing them Aladdin because then they're gonna, you know, they're gonna hold you to it. So you start speaking in Hebrew, and she says, yes, you know, betach. You know, we're gonna see that movie. So there was an interpreter, but the interpreter left the room, and now the brothers start speaking freely amongst themselves. And it says they didn't know that Yosef was Shomea. Let's see that verse. Vehem lo yadu, they did not know, they were unaware, ki Shomea Yosef, that Yosef was hearing them. Ki hamelitz bein nosam, for the interpreter had been as a go-between earlier in the conversation, and now he wasn't present. Now, they knew that Joseph was hearing the words they were saying, but they didn't realize that he was comprehending them, that he was understanding, and that's a third. So we have 3 shades of meaning on the word Shema. It can mean that I hear the sound, I accept what you're saying is number 2, and number 3 is I understand what's being said. And says the Maharal of Prague, the significance of the word Nishma means to understand. And what they're saying is that we are going to perform the mitzvahs even if we are lacking the understanding. We're not going to say, well, first explain to me why I need to do this. Naseh, we are ready, we are willing to do it. And only then do we say Nishma. He says the correct shade of meaning here is to understand. We're not going to hinge our performance and observance upon understanding. I had an interesting thought last night. I was learning with a boy who's 11, 12 years old, 12. He's having his bar mitzvah soon, and we were studying for his bar mitzvah. And we were talking about different ways of categorizing the mitzvahs. There's a lot of mitzvahs. How many mitzvahs are there in the Torah? 613. There are 613. There's a lot, and therefore there are different ways that you could split them into different categories. You could have the ones that are between man and and fellow man and God, right? Meaning, if you choose to eat a cheeseburger on Yom Kippur, that will not harm the person next to you. That's between you and God. But if you're dishonest in business, you cheat and you steal, that's between man and fellow man. Then there are the do's and the don'ts, the positive commandments, the actions that we're meant to do, like eat matzah on Passover is a positive, not eating bread on Passover is a negative. And then there's a third way, which is less known, and that is the ones that we understand, that kind of, even if God didn't tell them to us, we would kind of come to that conclusion on our own, like don't murder, don't steal, adultery. And then there are the ones that we don't really get the reasons for, like for example, there's a law that you're not supposed to wear a garment that's made out of a mixture of wool and linen. Why? I don't know. You know, even the idea, some people give explanations about eating pork. Why can't a Jew eat pork? It's one of these things that the full level of comprehension we're missing. Mixing milk and meat, why can't I mix milk and meat? You'll hear some thoughts on the topic, but really it's considered something which is beyond our understanding. That's a way of categorizing. The ones that we understand, the ones that we don't. And kind of what we're saying here is, we will do them even before the nishma, even before we understand. So I said to this young boy named Matthew, I said, you know, the following thought just occurred to me. Imagine Albert Einstein comes over to you, and he starts telling you about a novel thought that he had in the realm of physics. And you have no idea what the heck he's talking about. It sounds like absolute gibberish. You lost him on the first 3 words. Will you say to yourself, this guy's off his rocker? I mean, this is utter nonsense, right? Or will you say to yourself, he's a pretty smart guy. I know nothing about physics. Probably is just above my head, and this guy's probably, what he's saying, is intelligent. Which of the 2 conclusions would you come to? You would be foolish to conclude the first. The second one is more logical. If you have a man who is well known for his brilliance, and he starts talking to you in terms that mean nothing to you, chances are it means something to somebody who has that level of understanding. So then I turned to the boy, I said, well, who gave Albert Einstein his intelligence? Who endowed him with that incredible mind? It was his creator, it was God. That would have to place God as more intelligent than Albert Einstein, at least, right? So if God tells you something, and we know that he's intelligent, do you say, this is gibberish, this is nonsense, wearing wool and linen? It doesn't make any sense. Or would you say, it probably does make sense, it's just above my pay grade, I don't understand that. you would be wise to assume the latter. And that was a thought that I had last night. And that's this idea that our willingness to accept the mitzvahs, and that's why it's important that we place that one first, we will do even before we understand. There's a third one, a third explanation, and that is offered by the Meshech Chachma, who was Rabbi Simcha HaKohen of Dvinsk, much later, living in the 1900s. And what he points out is that if you look at, we mentioned the number of mitzvahs is 613. Could any one person perform all 613 mitzvahs? Is it possible for one person to do all of them? And the answer is no, and I'll give you a reason why. There's a mitzvah to give certain priestly gifts to the Kohen, to the priest. Especially when they lived in Israel, there were a percentage of the crop, you would give them 2%. There's a mitzvah for the Kohen to eat. It's considered, once it's given, once it's tithed off, it's considered sacred food. There's a mitzvah for the Kohen to eat it. The Kohen can't perform the mitzvah of giving it, and the non-Kohen can't perform the mitzvah of eating it. There's a mitzvah for a king, that a king should write 2 Torah scrolls, one that stays with him and one that's in his treasure house. If you're not the king, you can't do it. There are mitzvahs that could be performed only by people living in Israel, only during temple times. There are mitzvahs specific to women. There are mitzvahs specific to men. It's very difficult for one person, it's actually impossible for one person to do them all. But how can you have a connection to all of them? If you study about them, if you learn the sections of the Torah that speak about them. That will give you a connection to all of them. And he explains that's the idea of Nishma, that we will hear, we will study all the laws of the Torah, and thereby we will have a connection to every single component. Even a mitzvah that you can't do, learn about it, and then you will, in a certain way, be as if you have performed it. Again, so those are 3 explanations. We started with the Beis Halevi, who says there are 2 components to Torah study. One is learning to know what to do, and the other one is just what we call Torah Lishma, learning for the sake of learning Torah, even if you're never going to put it into practice. The second explanation is the idea that our na'aseh, our willingness to do, is not hinged upon our understanding, and we showed you that there are 3 ways of translating the word to hear, and the one that's used here is really to understand. I will do it even if I don't understand it. And then this third way is we're going to study all of it, even those mitzvahs that we can't do, and thereby we will have a connection to all 613. Now we can talk about cheesecake. All right? Now I try not to eat too much cake, and that's good for my diet. But cheesecake is a weakness of mine, and therefore I tell my wife, please don't make cheesecake because, and she makes it and we enjoy it, and I try to exert some level of self-control. Dairy, cheesecake, and these foods. When I got married, I was a meat man. Like if I had a choice of going to any restaurant I wanted to, it would always be meat. And my wife had a profound impact on me. And now whenever we go out for dinner, if we're going out, we often cook in because we both enjoy cooking. But when we go out, I'm always looking for a dairy restaurant. When you do kosher, you have to make that choice. You can't have a restaurant that's serving kosher food and serving milk and meat. It's either dairy or it's meat. And now I am a convert. I am a dairy man. So we'll look for Italian restaurants and things like that. So there's a custom to eat dairy. It's not limited to cheesecake. It's all kinds of dairy foods on Shavuot. And the question is, why? What is the source of that custom? And I hope to go through with you probably about 6 different explanations as to why we have dairy food on Shavuot. Okay, so the first one, it's actually brought down in the Code of Jewish Law, and I gave you that text only in Hebrew, but I'll read it with you. It's on page 5. If you read the Hebrew, fine. If not, I will translate every word as I go along. And this is from the commentary of Rabbi Moshe Israelis, who wrote an addendum to the main Shulchan Aruch, to the main Code of Jewish Law, which was written by a man named Rabbi Joseph Cairo. That's a fascinating story in its own. He actually wrote, Rabbi Moshe Israelis wrote his entire Code of Jewish Law, spent years working on this project, and then the other rabbi came out with his first. He didn't want there to be 2 codes of Jewish law, one that would be used by the Sephardic Jews, the Jews of Spain, Morocco, and Israel, and the other ones that would be used in the Ashkenazic Jews of Germany and Poland. So he kind of took the book and buried it. 3 or 4 years of work and buried it. But any spot where he had his own things to interject, either because he disagreed or he felt there was a point that needed to be added, he inserted them into the other rabbi's book. And now we have one unified code of Jewish law. When you think about what a self-sacrifice for the betterment of the Jewish people, it's an incredible act. So this is a quote now of the Ramah, and he says, "V'no hagin, there is a minhag, there is a custom, the chol makom in all places, Le'echol, to eat, ma'achale chalav, dairy foods. And you see just from the wording that it wasn't limited to cheesecake. It was all dairy foods. Yom Rishon Shel Shavuot, on the holiday of Shavuot. And he goes on to explain the reason. And he says that in temple times, there was an offering, a special offering that was brought on this holiday, part of which were 2 loaves of bread, known as the Shtei Halechem, 2 loaves. And we want to commemorate that. And he says, therefore, what we do is, in one meal, this is the way they did it then, they had one meal where they started off with dairy, and then they cleared the table, and they went to eat meat. Now there's a law in the laws of kosher, in the laws of milk and meat, that says that bread that is served at a meat meal, because we're concerned that people may have had some grease on their hands when they were taking, like if you ever look at the way people in the Middle East eat, bread is still the staple of the meal, and they'll dip the bread into different dips like hummus, or I've seen them dip it into tuna fish, but bread is the staple of the meal. So there's a concern that people were reaching for the bread, residual grease, residual meat on their hand, and they touch the bread. If you use that bread with dairy now, you'll be mixing milk and meat. And therefore there's a law, it's rabbinic, to safeguard the laws of the Torah, that says that bread that was served at a dairy meal, you should not eat together with meat. Now, if you're one of those people that don't want to waste food, you've left over challah after Shabbos, and you want to make French toast, which is done by submerging bread in a mixture of milk and eggs, and some people put a little sweetener in there too, and you don't want to waste, there are ways that you could deal with this law. If you don't cut all the bread, or if you remove it from the plate where anyone would take from it, so you ensure that no grease, then you're allowed to. But because you can't have the same bread by a milk meal and by a meat meal, that would require people to use 2 loaves of bread and thereby commemorate the offering of the 2 loaves that was brought in temple times on Shavuot. That's the explanation given in the Code of Jewish Law. And we'll see a few more. So I go through them in numbers, and we're going to now move to number 1. Number 1, even though it's really for us, it's number 2 because we've already seen 1. Another idea. Jews in the Torah, right, there's a dietary code called the kosher laws. Before the Jewish people got the Torah, before they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, after they left Egypt, were there any restrictions as to what Jewish people were allowed to eat? Pretty much not. You know, there's actually something called the Noahide Code, which are laws that apply to all nations of the world. 7. There are 7 mitzvos that Jews expect all mankind to abide by. Don't murder, don't steal, sexual immorality, having a fair legal system, not cursing God's name, idolatry. Number 7 on that list is actually a law of what you're allowed to eat. You're not allowed to rip a limb off of an animal while it's alive and eat it. So that's one law they had to live by even before they got the Torah. But they were allowed to eat pork. Imagine you're an Israelite and you're having bacon and eggs for breakfast, right? I was once studying with a fellow. I study with people all the time, and we have coffee. And the fellow said, I'm really hungry. Is it okay if we go somewhere else other than Starbucks? And I said, okay, I'll have a cup of coffee really anywhere in a styrofoam cup. Not a problem. And we sit down. I get my coffee in a to-go cup, and he orders bacon and eggs. And he's sitting across from a rabbi. And he says to me, I hope I'm not offending you by eating this bacon in front of you. And I said, listen, man, you do what you do. But I just want you to realize one thing. Don't think that because I'm a rabbi and I'm sitting here watching you eat it, this is under rabbinical supervision. It's not. So Jews, before the Torah was given, were allowed to eat bacon, pork, shellfish. They were allowed to mix milk and meat. You could have a cheeseburger. But when the Torah was given, now all of a sudden they're bound by the kosher laws. They're not allowed. So they come back home to their homes, Huge, incredible display. God reveals himself, gives us the Torah, and you come back home, and you're Jews, so you want to eat. Right? I guess everyone eats. We're extra fond of eating, right? So the problem is that the pots that I was using yesterday are no longer kosher. Like when you speak about a pot being kosher, what does that mean? It means that the metal of the pot has absorbed. Like if you ever use a plastic container, it's very easy to see this. If you take a very strong smelling substance, for example, Seder night, horseradish, you grind your own horseradish and you store it in a plastic container. You can scrub and scrub and scrub. You can empty out all the horseradish and you can scrub and scrub. You will not get rid of the smell. It will smell like horseradish. Why? Because the actual plastic has absorbed those flavors. And it's true by metal as well. Metal absorbs flavor, not as much as plastic, but it absorbs. And that's what makes the pot not kosher, is that it has absorbed flavors from the non-kosher food. So the Jews now find themselves in a predicament. They want to eat, but their pots are not kosher. if you want to eat meat, you got to cook it first. You can't eat meat raw. So it was just simpler to go with the cereal and milk, because that's like one of those like easy to go, quick things. So because they had to eat milk, dairy, because they couldn't cook the meat because their pots weren't kosher, that's another reason why we commemorate that. We're commemorating the moment that we got the Torah, the ramifications that it had, so we have dairy on Shavuot. This next one's one of my favorites, all right? There are two, so now we're moving on to a third explanation. There are two foods that are seen as being the staples of life. Two foods that, if you say, if you were to guess, what do they feed people in prisons in Japan? I'm guessing it's bread and water, right? No cable TV. You don't have a menu, like a drop-down menu that you could order from, right? They're giving you bread and water. And those foods could sustain life. But the thing is that neither of those two foods on their own are capable of sustaining life. If you were to have just bread, no water, eventually you would dehydrate. It would happen pretty quickly, actually. A few days, you need water. If all you have is water, you could last for longer than if all you have is bread, right? If you have water, you could easily go a week. But then you need calories. Water has no calories. Which, by the way, as an aside, it's an incredible thing. We live in a world, part of our Jewish belief is that we try to think about God, and we try to appreciate God's kindness for us, looking at the things that we do have. And we live in a world that the things that are most vital for our existence are the most abundant and are the most affordable. So when you think about, what's really expensive, gold and diamonds, are those critical for existence? Some women may say yes, but it's not really needed. When you think about clothing is needed, it's somewhat affordable. And then you start thinking about food. You could buy a 10-pound bag of potatoes for about $3. That'll be enough food for a week. All right, so you could feed yourself for very little money, and food is therefore, it's abundant. We need it, and it's abundant and it's cheap. But water, which is even more crucial than food, right? We said you could go for probably a week with just water, if not more, right? Water is super crucial, and it's incredibly abundant. It costs almost nothing. And then there's one substance which is even more crucial for our survival, and it's even more common and prevalent than water, and that's air. Because you can't live without it for probably more than a minute, right? You need to breathe, 2 minutes. So just appreciating the world that God put us into is so well designed for our survival, and just taking a moment to reflect on that. So going back to bread and water, those are the two staple foods, and neither of those two alone could support life. Together they do a fine job with a vitamin supplement. The one food, though, which is capable of sustaining life is milk. Babies live on it for the first 2 years of their life. I'll do sometimes if I'm really hungry and I don't have any time and I'm just rushing. You down a cup of milk, and it does the body good. It's just wonderful, right? So milk alone is capable of supporting life. It contains the hydration elements. It contains the calories. Gives us life. And the symbolism there is that the Torah, which we got on Shavuot, we believe that it sustains all of our spiritual needs. Just like milk alone is capable of sustaining all of our physical needs, the Torah is capable of being a spiritual life force for the Jewish people. Which brings to mind a story. It's a famous story. The story is the story of the great sage Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was one of the great teachers of Israel. His life story is really a topic for a class in and of itself. But he lived in the era of Roman persecution. The Romans forbade many Jewish practices, included in that was the study of Torah. They forbade the study of Torah, the teaching of Torah, its dissemination and spreading the knowledge of Torah, under penalty of death. If you were to teach Torah, they would kill you. And Rabbi Akiva was undeterred. He continued teaching his students Torah, and his students said to him, Rabbi, aren't you scared that the Romans might catch you and they may kill you? You may lose your life for this, which, by the way, he did. He was brutally murdered by the Romans in a horrific way. And he said to his students, I'm going to tell you a story. What's the story? The story is the story of the fox and the fish. And one day the fox comes to the river, rather hungry. And he sees a fish, a very, very plump-looking fish swimming around in the river, and he says to the fish, I saw some fishermen making their way down to this river. They're going to try to catch you. If you come sit here next to me, they're not going to think to look for you out of the water. Of course, the wily fox was hungry. And the fish says to the fox, you know, if I stay in the water, I may get caught, and that might be the end of my life. But I may elude the fisherman, and I may live to swim another day. If I come out of the water, a fish out of the water can't breathe. I will definitely die. And Rabbi Akiva says to his students, if we continue to study Torah, we may get caught by the Romans. We may get killed. But if the Jewish people stops their connection to the Torah, then we would definitely cease to exist as a nation. And that's the idea of milk. Milk is vital for survival. We believe the Torah is vital for our survival as well. A few more reasons. When you look to nurse a person back to health, milk is considered one of those foods that nurtures, that sustains. And we believe that scholars who study Torah, the Torah weakens a person's strength for two reasons. One's a very simple thing. When you're sedentary, when you're not active, you have less strength. Like when I go running, I love running, I'm a runner. I have a tremendous amount of energy for the next 4 hours after I run, and I usually crash and need like a 5-minute nap. But you know, those endorphins are like pumping, you know, it's great. So when you're sedentary, you're less energetic. But on a deeper level, we believe that spirituality and physicality are in a balance. And the more you are engrossed in one, then the other will naturally not be as strong. And Torah, which is a spiritual endeavor, will maybe take a person's physical strength a little bit. And therefore, we're trying to restore our strength. And that's another reason why we have a custom to eat dairy, to nurture us back to full strength. Two more reasons. One of them is a relatively simple one. When we got to Torah, we became like a new people. Completely new. Born again, if you wish. And no intention to allude to other religions there. But it was symbolic of really the start of a new nation. And a baby, when they're born, the first time, the first few years of their life, they drink milk. So therefore, we're showing how we were born again as a people, and we revert back to having dairy, to drinking milk. And I'll end with the fifth reason, and that is that milk is considered a more humble food. And I'll explain why it's humble in a moment, but when you speak about character traits or qualities that are necessary to succeed in the study of Torah, humility is at the top of the list. If you're humble, you acknowledge that you don't know everything and you're ready to learn more. So humility is crucial for Torah, and therefore on the holiday that we got to Torah, we want to display humility, so we eat milk, which is considered the more humble food. But I ask you, why is milk considered the more humble food? And again, we have two levels of understanding. On a simple level, dairy is considered a less expensive food. Meat, chicken, all that is costly. Compare that to dairy. Go to a meat restaurant, you'll have a bill which is significantly higher, and especially if it's kosher, it will be significantly higher than if you go to a dairy restaurant. So it's a more humble food. But on a deeper level, this is incredible. You know that when man was created, Adam, did Adam ever grill on Memorial Day weekend? Did he ever do a barbecue? And he may have, but if he was grilling anything, it was veggie burgers. He was maybe doing portobello caps. He was not grilling meat, because when Adam was created, he was not allowed to eat meat. Originally, man was told by God, your diet will be vegetation, things that grow from the ground. We were not allowed to kill another animal and eat it. It was only in the times of Noah, after the great flood, where he personally was responsible for saving the animal kingdom. He gave them refuge on his ark, and he saved them. Now they were indebted to him. That gave him the right to lord himself over the animals and say, you only exist because of me. I dominate you, and now I will put you on my grill. All right? So, and we're allowed to. Jews believe that, the Torah believes that animals are here to serve our purposes. We treat them kindly, we treat them well. But we wear leather shoes because we believe that an animal is here to fulfill the needs of humans. We're not just a more intelligent animal. In Jewish thought, we say that there are 4 ways of categorizing everything in this world. There is the domain, which means the inanimate object like the rock. There's the tzomeach, that which grows, a tree, a plant, a cucumber while it's growing. There is the chai, there are the living animals. But humans are not in the category of living animals. We are called the midaber, those that have the ability to speak. And that creates a whole new category. That's why we have a right to eat the animals. We are a whole new category, and they only survive because of us. So when we eat an animal, we are making a statement. We're saying, we are superior to you, which is true. But it's still a statement, and it's not a humble statement. And therefore, in order to display our humility, not the whole holiday, you could have meat on the holiday, but there's a custom to some point have milk to show that we're a humble people and that we are readily, happily wishing to receive the Torah. When I wish you all a very beautiful holiday this coming Wednesday and Thursday. It starts Tuesday night. There will be no class, because it's a holiday next Wednesday, there will be no class next Wednesday, and we will resume the week thereafter with the wonderful Rabbi Levi Burnham. We alternate months. His month is next. So it was a pleasure spending the month with you all here. I want to wish you a very happy holiday and enjoy the rest of your day.